Hello everybody, and welcome to this fourth webinar in the series that we're delivering for early years and childcare settings within the East Sussex area. The focus of this particular webinar is on preparing those of you who operate as a committee-run setting to hand over when you have a changeover of committee members. So if that's not your situation, do feel welcome to stay on the webinar, because it does talk more generally about good practice in terms of governance. But the examples we're going to be using are specifically related to committee-run settings. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jacqui Burke, and I specialise in delivering business training for the early years and childcare sector, and I'm also the author of Building Your Early Years Business. So the purpose then of today's webinar is to provide you with some guidance on how to prepare yourself and your committee to hand over in that situation when a new committee takes over. And this is really important because it ensures what we call continuity of governance. And I'll explore a little bit later what that actually means. But it is a really important legal requirement. So I'm going to start by saying a little bit about what a voluntary management committee, which is the full title, what that body actually is and why it exists in an early years setting. So if you are operating as an early years provider and you wish to have charitable status, which is obviously important for many in our sector, then you need to actually be a registered charity. And that's a legal requirement for you if your business income for your setting is over £5,000 a year. And it's actually the registered provider of your childcare provision, so whoever is Ofsted registered, that has to carry out that registered charity activity on the Charities Commission website. So as a registered charity, because there are various benefits that you are able to attract as a result of that status, there are also some requirements and some responsibilities. And one of those key requirements is that as a registered charity, you have to have a board of trustees. In our sector, the language that we use usually calls this a committee, and we refer to committee members. They are exactly the same thing. So when you hear people talk about charity trustees, it means exactly the same as in our language we describe as committee members. The appointment of trustees or committee members, as I will refer to them, must be in accordance with your governing document. So for your particular setting, you will have a document which we often refer to as our constitution, which sets out things like who can be a committee member. Are there limits in terms of how many of different types of committee members you have? For example, some constitutions tend to specify that a certain number of your committee members must always be parents of children that are currently being cared for within the setting. Others have much looser definitions. So it's really important to read your governing document and understand how many committee members you must have and what sort of people can and can't be appointed as committee members. And you need to obviously select and appoint appropriate people in accordance with your governing document. So I mentioned at the very beginning that if you are an early years setting and you're not a registered charity, there isn't a legal requirement for you to have a voluntary management committee, but it's really good practice for any early years business to think about having some sort of governance and organisation structure although it's not a legal requirement, because it's good practice to do so. And I'm going to say a little bit about why governance for all of us is an important issue. So I'll say a little bit in a minute about what governance actually means, but why does governance matter? Well, sorry, my slides have jumped forward one here. So governance matters across all sectors and in all types of organisations. So I've just put 3 examples up on the screen here of very large organisations, 2 of them commercial businesses and 1 of them which was operating as a charity, who have been national scandals over the last several years that have been widely reported in the press. And what happens in each of those cases, because public money has been put at risk and customers have been put at risk, is there's usually a public inquiry following those scandals. And on each of these occasions, the key factor that was found to have caused the problem was a failure of governance. And governance was cited in those public inquiry reports for each of these. So Sports Direct, you may remember, it's one of our high street names, run by a very powerful individual called Mike Ashley. And he was basically the main man in Sports Direct. And basically nobody questioned what he did. And as an organisation, some people whistle blew, and they were found to have very inappropriate and in many cases illegal staff practices in place that meant they were treating their staff absolutely appallingly. You probably remember, protests against them on the high street and things of that sort. And what was found to be the case, that because this one individual who owned the company was so powerful that nobody else dared question what he was doing, the decisions he made. Nobody had any sort of oversight of how that business was being run. Volkswagen was another interesting example. So you probably remember Volkswagen was the first of a number of car manufacturers that were highlighted under this diesel emissions scandal. So they were found to be fiddling the diesel emissions test for their vehicles to make them seem a lot more eco-friendly, green-friendly than they were actually, by actually putting a little piece of software in there that actually fiddled the figures when they were tested. And again, this was actually a global, it wasn't just a UK issue. The investigations proved that this again was a failure of governance, and that shareholders were put at risk because this, and customers obviously lost out. I actually owned a Volkswagen diesel vehicle myself at the time, and that caused some problems when I tried to then sell that vehicle. So this was found again to be a small group of individuals, kind of a clique of individuals that were on their governing board. So they did have a governing board, but they were all kind of pals of the owners, or, people that they knew, and it was very cliquey. So again, nobody really questioned what was going on. And because the board was dominated by the family and their friends and their yes men, actually there was no proper oversight, and that's how they got away with doing those sort of things. And then Kids Company, closer to home in our own sector, a large national charity that benefited from millions of pounds of government money to do the work that they were doing, supporting disadvantaged children and their families. And that much of that money just kind of disappeared without any real accountability of where that went. And they then very spectacularly went bust, having just been given a further multi-million-pound contract. And again, the public inquiry that looked at this found that as a charity, they should have had a strong committee of trustees, board of trustees, and they failed to put that in place because the people that they were appointing were perhaps not appropriate individuals to have that independence and be able to have oversight and question what was going on within that provision. So you start to see how important governance is, particularly when we're in a sector where we're dealing with children and perhaps vulnerable families, and where also we have access to public funding to complete our activities. So it's absolutely essential. So let's understand a bit more about what governance means and how that differs from the day-to-day management of your childcare business. So on the left-hand side of the screen there, I've just got some descriptions that you will recognize. This is what management is all about. So the management of your setting will be doing things like running the setting on a day-to-day basis, all those things like, collecting the fees and setting rotas and looking after the premises and the staff and the equipment and everything. And they'll be making the operational decisions. So those short-term minor decisions that happen every day in any business, it's just kind of business as usual stuff. They'll be the people that are dealing with the children, the staff, the parents on a day-to-day basis, and they'll be managing the quality of the provision within your setting. So governance is different. Governance is involved in all those things, interested in all of those things, but in a different way and at a different level. So governance is about overseeing what happens in the setting to ensure that good standards are being set and maintained by your managers in order to keep children safe. It's about making not those day-to-day operational decisions, but making what we call strategic decisions. And that's the big decisions, the long-term decisions, the decisions that perhaps involve significant change being made within how the setting is run. It's about doing some monitoring of how the setting is going about dealing with the children and staff and parents, rather than getting involved in doing those things yourselves. And it's about monitoring the quality of the provision to ensure that it's meeting appropriate standards as would be expected by our regulatory bodies. So we have an interest in all the same things, but our involvement is different. So I'm going to unpick each of those aspects of our governance role and just understand in practical terms what that actually means you might be doing on a day-to-day basis as a committee member in an early years setting. So first of all, overseeing what happens in the setting. So this is very much about setting good standards, ensuring good standards are set and maintained and that children are kept safe. So this will involve you doing, first of all, researching some good practice. So if you're going to have oversight of good standards, you need to know what good looks like to start with. So you need to do a bit of reading and research and maybe attend some webinars and things of that sort to really understand what good practice is expected within your early years setting. And then it's up to the committee to set those high standards and expectations when you communicate with the setting managers. And you should be requesting and reviewing reports from managers that will tell you how those standards are being maintained on a day-to-day basis. And you should be reviewing those reports at your committee meetings. And obviously taking an active interest in safeguarding, because that's obviously our prime objective when we're looking after children. Secondly, then, making strategic decisions. So as a committee, you need to make sure that you structure your agendas so that you have time during your committee meetings for strategic decision making. And that you avoid your committee meetings turning into a meeting that's just about the detail about the state of the toilets and what color you're going to paint the walls and things of that sort. So the committee should be focused on the real big picture issues, the real things that affect the whole running of the setting, that are long-term questions, and that any decisions that are involving significant changes, those are decisions that should be considered and made at the committee level. And then moving on to monitoring. So a big part of your role as a committee is monitoring how the setting is dealing with staff, children, and parents. So as a committee, again, you should be requesting and reviewing reports from management, which you review at your committee meetings, on a regular basis about how the relationships with the children, with staff, and with parents are being managed. That will also mean that you need to actually set those standards in the first place. So as an early years business, there will be a range of policies and procedures in place for all sorts of things. And it's the committee's responsibility to sign off those policies and procedures to ensure that they are in place and that they are correct and up to date. You will also need to actively seek feedback from various stakeholders as to how your setting is dealing with them. So key stakeholders here would be the staff. So think of a way that the committee could get feedback from staff. So that might be through a staff survey once a year, or it might be through making sure that when you as a committee member visit the setting, that you have a little chat with staff about how things are going. And same with parents. So you may decide that you want to do a parent satisfaction survey once a year and see the results of that. Or it may be that when you visit the setting, you want to make sure that you are perhaps standing at the door when parents come to meet their children and collect them, and that you have a chat with parents about how things are going and how they feel about the setting. And you may like to get some feedback from the children. This is one of the fun parts of being a committee member when you do come in and visit the setting, is chatting with the children. And for sure, without much prompting, they'll tell you what they think about being in the setting. And it's important that you require management to feed back, not only on what they're doing, but where you've actually set targets for improvement, that they're feeding back to you about the improvements that they've made. So you follow that up at the next committee meeting. So the next part of your role is about respecting the role of staff. So this is really important. So in terms of respecting the role of staff, you need to set out very clearly what activities are delegated to staff, are their responsibility. And these are called delegated responsibilities. So if you're giving some of your role as a committee to your manager of your setting, then it's really important that they understand that you recognize and respect their role. And this means you need to resist the temptation to step in and do it for them. Remember that clear distinction that we made between management and governance. So you need to let them get on with being the manager. And you need oversight of that and monitoring of it, but not to actually step in and do it for them. So one of the things you may wish to do is actually find out if your setting has an up-to-date job description for the key that sets out the key responsibilities of your senior team within your setting, and make sure that's clear about which responsibilities the committee has delegated to them. So the final part of your governance role as a committee member will be about monitoring the quality of the provision. And quality in early years is obviously essential and is overseen by our regulatory body, Ofsted. So as a committee, you need to be requesting and reviewing reports from management about the quality of the provision, using the criteria that is being applied by Ofsted and will be applied by Ofsted when they come and inspect your setting. So that means that it's really important that you build your knowledge and understanding of what Ofsted will expect. So if you haven't done so already, ensure that all of your committee members undertake some training about Ofsted's expectations. You can access that sort of training through your local authority and also directly from Ofsted. So I would recommend that you sign up to receive Ofsted's regular emails and bulletins and updates. You will find that they often send links to webinars that they are delivering that talk about their expectations when they come and inspect an early years setting. So that will ensure that you understand the standards that need to be in place. Also, make sure that as a committee, you understand the data and other documentation that your managers may be providing to you. So as a manager, they have to obviously collect a lot of data about how the children are progressing in their early education. And it's important that you don't just accept that information from management. If they're giving you information that you don't understand, question it. So be prepared to ask questions that are probing and challenging. So it's absolutely appropriate and necessary as a committee member that you do interrogate that data and, you know, ask your manager questions about, well, why is this figure different from that figure? And what should this number look like? And what are our expectations? And are we meeting the expectations in various areas, so that you really understand how your setting is performing in terms of the quality of the provision for your children. You will also need to sign off policies and procedures. And in particular, you should always be asking probing and challenging questions to make sure that children are kept safe and are well cared for in your setting. You may also like to visit the setting to see how some of those policies and procedures are being applied on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, if you read and sign off a policy that's about how you structure the children's day in terms of play and learning, you might want to actually come in and visit and see that that is what you see on the ground, that that is actually how a child's day is structured by your staff within the setting. Okay, so that says a little bit about the role of the committee. So hopefully that helps you to understand a little bit about what's expected of you and how you can structure your time and structure your committee meetings. So I'm going to go on now to talk a little bit about what we call continuity of governance. So continuity of governance is really important. As we've seen previously, having strong governance in place is essential. And that means that needs to be in place all the time and not have gaps. So unfortunately, what can sometimes happen in an early years setting is because we have an expectation, or in some cases a requirement in your governing document, that a certain proportion of your committee members have to be parents of children who are currently in the setting. That means inevitably, when those children get to the age where they leave your setting and go off to primary school, that you lose those people as committee members and you have to replace them with new people. So that can be really tricky if you've got all of your committee made up of current parents and their children are all in exactly the same age group. It means you lose the whole of your committee all in one fell swoop. And then you're left with nobody that actually has a clue what went on before. So these poor new people all coming in brand new as committee members have got nobody to ask what happened previously. And what often happens is that there tend to be the outgoing committee kind of tends to put together a kind of, you know, a bag full of stuff, and the new committee coming on board get what I call the plastic bag handover. So they're just given this kind of bag full of stuff and told to get on with it. Well, that's kind of a bit alarming, really, isn't it? So what I recommend instead is to do things slightly differently. So the first thing is avoid the need to replace the whole of your committee at the same time. So here are some ways in which you can do that. The first is stagger your committee appointment dates. So try not to appoint everybody on the same date so that they all get to the point of leaving at exactly the same date. So you might start some people this year and then some more people next year. So don't have all of your committee members from your new intake of parents with children all in the same age group. Try and stagger them across the different age groups so that when they come up to go into primary school, some will go this year and some will go the following year, etc. So that means you've always got some parents that will stay on your committee for at least another year. If your constitution allows it, you may also want to appoint what we call affiliate committee members. So affiliate committee members are people whose membership isn't dependent on them having a child in the setting. So it is really important that you check your governing document, your constitution beforehand, to check how many of your committee members can be affiliate members. And if you're puzzled or not sure, your membership organisation, such as the Early Years Alliance or whatever, would be able to advise you on this. So if your constitution allows you to do so, it can be really valuable to appoint affiliate members because they don't have to serve a particular term of office. They don't have to leave you when a child goes on to primary school. So actually these can often become the committee members who stay for a number of years and become almost kind of the backbone of your committee, because they're the experienced people that can then help you to bring new people on board. So what are these committee members that are not parents? Well, they may be, for example, members of staff. So you might want to invite one or two senior members of staff from your setting onto your committee. I would advise not to have too many of them. If you have a close relationship with another setting or with your local school, you might want to invite a staff member from those organisations to come and join your committee as an affiliate member. This is a really good way, for example, of cementing your relationship with your local primary school. Certainly when I was a primary school governor, I served as a committee member also for the local setting within our area. Affiliate committee members can also be local people, local business people. Now, this can be really helpful. So in my current governance role, that's what I am. I'm a community person who simply is engaged as a committee member, as a governor, actually, because it's a school setting, as a local member of the business community. Now, this can be pretty useful, particularly if you are a setting that has some financial challenges. Maybe you want somebody that's got a really good business brain and that maybe understands the finances of the business much more thoroughly. So you might want to particularly seek an affiliate committee member who has a financial background in terms of their day job. Or maybe you've got staffing issues. You might particularly want to look for an affiliate committee member who perhaps has an HR or personnel background. And affiliate committee members can also be past parents. So sometimes you get a parent of a child in the setting, or maybe they've had 2 or 3 children through your setting, and actually they're quite sad to leave as a committee member once they no longer have a child with you. So if you have an opportunity to do so, you might like to say to those individuals, well, why don't you continue with us in a different capacity and continue with us as an affiliate committee member? And again, that's a really good way of retaining that experience and expertise on your committee, and it gives you that continuity of governance. So to help you with your plastic bag handover and avoiding that, there are a few things that you should do in terms of preparing to hand over information to new committee members. And our local authority, East Sussex County Council, have prepared a really, really good committee handover pack, which you will find on the C-Zone. And you'll find a very comprehensive pack and also a basic checklist of the essential documents that you should be pulling together as part of your handover process. And you should be, get all of those documents and put them all together in a folder and label them so it's all nice and clear for an incoming committee. Also, your membership organisation will be able to help you with this and provide advice on perhaps any additional documents and things that they think you should include in your handover pack. In addition to the key documents that you provide to new committee members, it's a really good idea to have a conversation with your existing committee members, perhaps before people leave and go on, and ask them to think back to when they were brand new and ask them the question, what do you wish you'd been told or wish you'd been given to read when you first started? I think we can, all of us, remember, that first committee meeting that we attended, where we didn't have a clue what was going on and where it was all full of abbreviations and acronyms and things that we didn't really understand. And you get a bit embarrassed about spending the whole of the meeting going, oh, but what does that mean? So you don't ask, and then you're left a bit confused. So we all remember that experience, don't we? Think about that and have that conversation. So what would have made it easier for you when you first came on as a committee member? What would have made it easier for you at your very first committee meeting if you'd known about in advance or information you'd be given? And that might be as basic as what we used to do for our new committee members coming on board, just a glossary of all the kind of jargon that we tend to use in early years education that people may not have encountered before. And then that takes us to thinking then about induction and what induction might look like for new committee members coming on board. Now, I always encourage people to think about induction as a way simply of ensuring that newly appointed committee members are integrated into their role as quickly, as easily and effectively as possible. So that's all induction training means. It just means, how do we smooth the path so that people feel that they can get on with being an effective committee member as quickly and easily as possible. And the approach that I suggest for this is based on those yummy cakes that you can get called millefeuille, which means kind of lots of layers. And a millefeuille approach to induction simply looks like this. First of all, you might want to think about what induction do people need if they are new to the setting. So if they're a brand new parent who've only just sent their child to your setting, so they probably don't know much about the setting at all. What do they need if they know the setting, maybe, but they are just new to this committee? Maybe they've done governance roles in another organisation. So perhaps they've been a school governor, for example. So their needs would be slightly different. And what do they need if they're brand new to governance? They don't even know what governance means. So that might be if you invite a staff member to join the committee. They know the setting, but they're just new to governance. They don't know what their governance role is and how that differs from their day job. So different new committee members might require different elements of induction. So let's have a look and see what that might look like in practice. So it's a good idea to create a bit of an induction checklist for different people. And the key elements of an induction checklist will look like this. So there might be some physical induction that you need to do with people that are brand new to the setting. So that's about where facilities are, like where they can hang their coat up, and where they can get a cup of tea for the meeting, and where the toilets are, and obviously doing the statutory health and safety stuff about how to evacuate the building if, you know, fire alarm goes off in the middle of your meeting. There probably needs to be some information about the organisation of the setting. So a bit of background and history and the culture and values of the setting, its legal status as a registered charity, obviously, and what that means, and perhaps some key data and reports from previous committee meetings. That you probably want to introduce them to the rest of the team, the rest of the committee, and the key members of staff that they'll be meeting during the course of their role as a committee member. And you also want to make sure that they really understand their role and their responsibilities as a committee member. So it's going through some of those things that I covered in the first part of today's webinar. So in practice, it might look like this. Here's a couple of examples. So if you've got somebody who's perhaps a new parent that have just started sending their child to the setting, they maybe haven't been in and seen the setting apart from their show around. They need to understand that organisation stuff about the, you know, background and how the setting is actually organised. They need to meet other members of the committee and the manager of the setting, and they need to understand their role. So they need the lot, don't they? If they're simply new to this committee and have done a governance role before, they need the physical stuff. They need to know their way around the setting. They need how the setting is set up and organised. They need to meet other committee members, but they perhaps need less information about their governance role because they understand that from their previous experience. And if they're brand new to governance, but perhaps work in the setting, they don't need the physical stuff because they know where the loos are and where to get a cup of tea. They maybe need a little bit of information about the organisation, but they'll have covered a lot of that in their staff induction, won't they? So they probably just need a bit about the charitable status of the setting and how the governance side of things is organised. They maybe need to meet committee members, but obviously don't need to be introduced to the manager because they know the manager, they work with them every day, and they do obviously need to understand their governance role. So that's a really nice way of thinking about how do you induct new people onto your committee. So how do you make this actually work in practice? Well, I would recommend that you create a nicely set out induction program that makes use of information that already exists. You don't have to create something brand new. And again, pull it together in a folder. So tailor it to different committee members with the various elements, but make it engaging, make it relevant. So, you know, make sure that various people are involved. It shouldn't just be the chair of the committee that does the induction stuff. You might want to get different people to talk to a new committee members. For example, you might get the SENCO from the setting to talk to them about the SEND provision. And put new committee members in a position where they can manage their own learning at their own pace and in their own time. So this is just about empowering people, but obviously do just check with them that they're getting on okay with it. So making it engaging means doing different things. Don't just give them a pile of stuff to read because that's like really boring, isn't it? So you might also, in addition to things for them to read, arrange for them to speak to the various people. They will need to speak to other committee members, to the manager, to perhaps some key members of staff within the setting, maybe to your team at the local authority. And also think about some activities that they could do to help them to learn how it all works. So I'd suggest that they come in and meet and visit the setting, to meet the staff and to meet the children and see how the setting actually operates on a day-to-day basis. And that's particularly important if you've got committee members who aren't parents of children within the setting and so may never have visited before. And, you know, encourage them to engage with parents, talk to parents and start to build their knowledge and understanding of that. It's really important as well that you recognise that committee members come from all walks of life. and they walk into your committee meeting, not just as committee members, but as whole people. And they bring with them all of their life experiences and their skills and knowledge from, just from whatever they do in the rest of their lives. And I would recommend to you that it's important to find out a bit about those kind of knowledge and skills and experience that your committee members have, because that will really help you when you're thinking about who carries out what functions and how roles are split and allocated within your committee, because nothing's one person's responsibility. So a nice thing to do with new committee members is to do what I call a bit of a skills audit. So you might just want to ask new committee members when you're recruiting and appointing them to kind of fill in a little bit of detailed information about what has their previous experience be. And, have they worked before? Have they had a job? If so, what kind of things were they doing? What kind of things were they doing in their education? Was there a particular subject that they were particularly interested in or particularly good at? You might also want to ask if they've got particular knowledge or skills that might be of interest and valuable. And don't let anybody kind of fob you off by saying, oh, well, I'm just a mum. I don't have any particularly valuable skills or knowledge or experience, because we all know, don't we, that being just a mum involves you in a whole range of different skills, which are exceptionally valuable. So as parents, you will have skills in time management, and you will have skills in terms of working with a child and educating and bringing up a child. You'll have all sorts of skills and experiences. So do make sure that you capture and recognize that, because those skills and experiences and knowledge can be exceptionally valuable if you know you have them on your committee. So finally, a couple of final things that you can do to ease the way for your new committee members. It's a really nice idea to allocate a new committee member a buddy. So what we mean by a buddy is simply a more experienced committee member who can be on hand to answer all those questions you have when you first join. Because I know certainly when I first joined a committee, I didn't want to keep interrupting my first committee meeting by keep asking, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because it kind of disrupted the meeting. So it's really nice to have somebody that you can chat to about your different questions and say, that bit of the meeting, I didn't really understand what that conversation was all about. Can you just tell me a little bit about what was going on there, so that you don't feel embarrassed about having to ask questions and interrupt the meeting. So some of the questions typically that new committee members might have might be really practical questions, like, if I have to go somewhere to attend a course, how do I claim expenses for that? Or what happens if I can't attend a meeting? Who do I have to inform of that? There might be questions about understanding things. Well, what did that acronym mean in the meeting? I haven't heard that before. Or where can I find more about, for example, Ofsted's expectations? And there may be questions about your role. So when you're first appointed as a committee member, you kind of don't really know what you're meant to do. So questions about things like, well, what should I focus on first? And is there a procedure in place for doing that, like visiting the setting? And when I come and visit the setting, well, what am I meant to do? And what questions am I meant to ask? What questions am I allowed to ask was something that a new committee member asked me recently. She didn't really know that she was actually allowed to ask the staff questions. So these are some of the things that a buddy can be really, really valuable in supporting a new committee member in answering. And then finally, you might even do a joint visit. So it's lovely if perhaps that buddy can say to the new committee member, don't worry, when you first come and visit the setting, I'll come with you. And I'll kind of, you can come round with me and see what I do when I visit. Or if they can't do a joint visit, at least have a chat with the new committee member beforehand, so that, they've got an idea of what a more experienced person does when they visit. Okay, so that brings us to an end of today's webinar. So we've started off looking at the role of governance and where it fits into an early years setting. We've gone on to explore a bit about why continuity of governance is so important, and some things that you can do to ensure that you have continuity within your setting. And then we've thought finally about what you do to do that handover and induction for new committee members coming on board within your setting. So in terms of next steps, I would suggest now you take all of that information and also the information that's on the C-Zone in terms of that committee handover pack, and work with your colleagues on your committee to ensure that you've got a good handover pack and that you've got an induction process, and you've got everything in place for when new committee members are next appointed to your committee. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you found that useful and valuable. And just as a reminder, I've been Jacqui Burke from Flourishing People. So bye for now.